Okay, this video is for public speaking and argumentation. It can also be used for political science because it will be covering policy creation, but in the format of public speech patterns and persuasion for problem solution. Just FYI, this is the first time I've ever shot a video of my floor. And I'm using an image of me from my 20s, which I poorly cut out in my military uniform, and that is actually me. And there's going to just remember this for the end. But the way it's going to work is I'm going to be giving images and so forth, either drawing or, in this case, for public speaking and argumentation courses, the keyword outlines. So for example, today's COVID-19 thing, there's 3 kinds of deaths that we are trying to avoid with COVID-19. And so to give you an example how this works, the 3 kinds of deaths we want to avoid with COVID-19, the coronavirus, is the people who, number 1, are the infected. Those are folks who are obviously get infected by the virus. Number 2 is when we go beyond capacity at the hospitals and we start losing people who would come in for other things, and we just don't have the resources to handle that situation. That has occurred in places like Italy, other parts of the world, in the United States with the New York, New Jersey area. And we're seeing some of that happening in the rural area and in the South. So excess deaths beyond the virus due to capacity at hospitals and healthcare. And then finally, the last one is healthcare workers. We want to avoid the death of healthcare workers because I hate to put it in this kind of these words, but those folks have a lot of education behind them. And that is a resource we don't want to lose. It would be very detrimental to the healthcare system of any country if 1 to 2% of healthcare workers are removed due to death or other illness that stops them from working in their field, and especially in certain areas like ICU and ER doctors. That is a lot of stuff to try to come back from. So do you see how this works? I'm going to be bringing up ideas and so forth, and using this. I know I could have used a computer program or so forth, but you know me, I try to be a little bit fun. So I'm going to come down here and we're going to try to do this the best way possible. So let me change that. Alright, so there's 3 different things. So this is actually going to be talking about the coronavirus and how we handle it, and how to put it into a persuasion speech using problem solution. I'm going to be giving examples of actual winning arguments that stopped, that occurred due to the coronavirus. Things that you are living through right now in our society. So first one, if I bring it here just right, is this idea. If you have a city, this is represented by this square, and in this city you have a concert in this one venue. What you have to worry about with the coronavirus is what we call infections, contamination. And so when you have these large venues, a concert and so forth, you have to worry about, let's say one person comes in and due to the counters meets 10 people. So you have to worry about 10 people taking the virus and moving it to different parts of the city from this one large event. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now with concerts, it should be noted, and these kinds of venue events, that not everyone will get infected. But it could be 60, 70, 80, 90%. And so this one venue can spread out amongst the city here, and probably, you know, and there's a lot of variations to it, but the most dangerous thing about this kind of contamination, make it look a little bit different, is the fact that the possibility of spread from this one large event to a large amount of people and spreading it across the thing. Now, not everyone will get infected at the concert, but the probability is there, and of course probability goes up if it's indoors or a closed venue. Now, what about schools though? We'll take a normal everyday school district, same square again. You have the school right in the middle of it. That's how schools are supposed to work. You're supposed to have, put a square, you're supposed to have a school, everyone, elementary school, use my little thing to act like I'm talking, elementary school, middle school, high school, or even college. Usually what happens in this area, this is where all the students go to. And the reason why it's different from that concert venue is you can have the 10 cases, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And little Timmy goes to school infected, and he meets all his friends. Now, the dangerous part about school, those concert venues, they were what we would say one-off type situations. And so, by the way, I should note, you're not going to get me to do technical stuff. This is a generalization, a simplification of these ideas and concepts. So that's why I'm going to be using just general words. I'm not going to try to get any jargon out, all right? But you have these 10 kids, and the probability of them getting infected by the school goes up dramatically, because if little Timmy shows up at that high school and walks around and goes to all the different classes, that's maybe 6 periods that kid has the probability of hitting other students. And schools, public schools, meet 5 times a day. I mean 5 days a week. Sorry about that. 5 days a week. So the probability of getting it is much greater and more consistent on the school campus, because of just how many, just think about your own school days, how many students you meet and talk to and interact. Elementary school. Colleges, while they might not be at the campus as frequent, go from morning all the way to night. So, and it's large campuses, almost like the concert venue, but again, consistently going there. And what we learned about the coronavirus is that you can have it for a good amount of time and not show symptoms. So little Timmy going to the school campus, his parents would not be aware, and neither would the school, unless there's proper testing that he had symptoms before the probability goes up. So what is this in relation to what we know about from the coronavirus and what we're going through right now? Well, let's look at it in a speech pattern, a keyword speech pattern. And that's speech, excuse me one sec, I want to make sure it gets on there. Look at that thing and you notice some key words that I just talked about. Main point 1, large event contamination. You know, sub point, you have the encounters, talking about how the random, the probability and the venue dictates possible contamination. Subpoint 2, community reach, how it spreads from the one spot to a larger area. School contamination, you talk about the probability. You maybe mentioned probability in the first main point. In this one you go higher and stronger into it. Now you're not using the speech. The speech is not allowed for you to use, but you can see here you can talk about consistency, the opportunity for spread and infection on school campuses, and that the community outreach is much greater, because since the probability of infection goes up, their parents, when they go to work in different parts of town, different parts of the city, that spread goes out. And so you can see with these keywords, it goes into problem, last one, solution, which is eliminate greater risk by shutting down the system. The solution would be eliminate great risk, and 2, mitigate smaller examples, i.e. a combination of 2, why we shut down the businesses. Because the businesses had the consistency, some part of the consistency of schools where people show up to work 5 days a week, and the random encounters of customers coming in and spreading it to other parts of the city. This is how this kind of stuff works. You have those concepts that I show and kind of briefly introduce to you with these little drawings. And then these ideas go into problem, solution. And by the way, you're going to see this image a lot. Think about what we're going through right now, because your topic for this semester is what we do next with coronavirus. Here's what's going on right now in the United States with these liberate and early openings. I'm not saying right or wrong here, but you can see how this can continue with the large venue type events. Now, let's go into another concept, and that is the idea of infections in a city. If you can imagine a city being like a ping pong table, or, well, actually the best example of this is when I was a high school student and we did an experiment of a nuclear reaction by dropping a ping pong into a fish tank, empty fish tank with a bunch of mouse traps with ping pongs on top of it, and it led to all these ping pong bouncing around in an enclosed area. Same idea of the city, but this time it's like this. And so when you have possible contamination in a city area, you have those ping pongs bouncing in a confined area, what we would call population density. And these things, the contamination bouncing around, and so you saw that in New York, you saw that in other major cities around the world. And these balls, by the way, doing this, can even bounce out. And when you have large cities, you'll just have more of these squares. Bouncing around, going back and forth into these different areas, representing the city. And so you see this with the city infections, that contamination with the population density, and the more dense it is, the more this stuff bounces around into these areas. And like I showed here, and I'll show it here, they can bounce out of the city. And why is that important? Because when it bounces out to the city, it might go into a rural area where the infection rate and the possibility of bouncing off the walls is much bigger, because there's not as much density. It bounces around what we say a region, like this. Or a small town, just like we saw with the city, but with a small town. The bouncing around is slower. It takes a while. And especially with something like coronavirus that can last in somebody's system for a good amount of time, this bouncing around acts like a reservoir. So it bounces around in the city, and then it goes out into these larger regions, and it simmers. And then it can possibly, like earlier, bounce out of these regions and go right back into the city. We're seeing that with how the infection rates, we found out that more infection, the infected from outside the United States came from Europe than from China. And that's important to understand how this stuff bounces around. So why is this important in a speech? Again, this is not your topic or a speech you can do, but this is something that we are living right now, and you can see how this stuff is formed. Main point 1, research, city infections. There's lots of data out there showing how they talked about population density. Remember in the classes and the lectures and the Zoom meetings, I talk about the importance of analogy. So I use the ping pong ball bouncing around as the idea of that. Going back and forth. Oh look, there's me talking again. And then the holes going out of the city areas. and the spread in the cities with the density and the bounces back and forth and going to boroughs and small cities around there. Main point 2, infection reservoirs. Remember I talked about in the beginning of the semester about defining terms. Here's an example of defining a term. Infection reservoirs, the small towns, the villages, the rural regions of the country, as you would say, part of it. Simmering in these towns, not bouncing around as fast, but still bouncing around. And then, of course, subpoint 2, repeating the process. It bounces back to the city that maybe had the situation on handle, but like these Liberate events where everyone came to do these protests from different parts and outside of these areas, they went right back to their hometowns, home areas. Same thing with these folks who went into this party. They came from all these other places. Where these openings have occurred, where the things happen, and maybe Georgia opened before the other one, people flocked from states that were not open yet. So that leads to a solution: uniform practices. Everyone has to do it at the same time, which this country didn't, but other countries did. So this is where you can look up information how others did it. You don't have to come up with your own ideas. You just talk about isolating cases like South Korea, New Zealand, Germany, places like that, and avoiding the cycles of bouncing back and forth. You see how this stuff works? This is, by the way, these are actual arguments that were used to help policy be formed in this country and other parts of the world, and so forth. Let's go into the last one. And the last one, we're going to change characters here for a second, because we're going to go with another visual aid. Yes, right. The timer from your speeches, the Lego version of me. Now, why am I using Legos? Well, first off, I must confess, I do use the Legos for photography purposes. So let's keep that in mind when you're seeing all this stuff. But if we go back to this image of all these protests and these early openings and the stuff that occurs there, we still have to deal with the idea of the infection rate and how the disease spreads. And that's where a lot of misinformation is coming out of. So if you're doing a speech about explaining why we have to do this and why we should do certain things at the store, we go with the classic example of 10 people. 10 normal, do they all show up on the screen? Yeah, okay, you have 10 normal people there. 10 normal people, and you talk about, I don't know, how the infection rate occurs on other diseases besides coronavirus. For example, with Ebola, if you have an infectious person and 10 people around that infectious person, Ebola actually spreads pretty significantly of the 10, but it doesn't survive that much as well as some other ones. But when there's an active Ebola case, and if there's 10 people around it, you have a huge problem. With the flu, you have 10 people around that one person, maybe only 2 to 3 get infected, but the flu can last longer. It goes into cycles. There's a lot more possibility of spreads, as we all know with the frequency of flu season. So you can see that by establishing things we already know, you explain to your audience something you're about to explain to them, new information. That's coronavirus. Scientists and research that we have so far has indicated, and there's a reason why I use the mime, about 4 people get infected. 3 to 4. Let's say conservatively we say 3. We'll stop at Shakespeare there. Only 3 out of the 10 get infected with coronavirus. Now, the problem with coronavirus, besides all the different problems that we're having with it, is that it lasts a long time before anybody knows that they have it, because the symptoms, researchers have seen that it can last 7 to 14 days before people have symptoms. They're carrying around and infecting others. And some research has showed that in the nasal cavity it can last up to 21 to 23 days. So this is dangerous stuff that Ebola or the flu doesn't have. And so you take a pretty bad villain. We have Killmonger here. Now I'm not going to actually use Killmonger. I'm just showing him off because he's really cool looking. But actually we'll use the big bad. We'll use Thanos. And Thanos is here as he's one of the infected. If Thanos, while infected, not showing symptoms, he goes out and he infects, he meets 3 people in a day. 10 people in a day, and 3 more people are infected. He goes out the next day, 3 more people are infected. She has a tail, so that's why it's not sitting down right. Another day, 10 people, 3 of them get infected. Another day, another day, another day. And those people go out, and that cycle keeps occurring over and over and over again. This is the deadly spread of coronavirus. It is not as it doesn't have as high rate as Ebola, but it has the stronger lifespan of the flu, and it's more likely to spread than the flu. So you can see there those reference points. And how do I know all this information? Because the information is out there. World Health Organization, CDC, other countries' information, research from across the world, major institutions. This information is out there. And when you compare it to other health issues, like for example guns, which have barriers to do simple research here in the United States, or something that happens like an outbreak from a thing, from a meat, or what are they when they have the romaine lettuce when it gets contaminated, recalls. And why is this important? Why am I using all these Lego figures to explain the spread of coronavirus? Well, the reason why is when you go to your local store, and even if it's in areas where people think that they're safe, stores are going to enforce these rules. And the reason why they're doing that, main point 1, infectious disease spreads. Finding that information and explaining using examples of flu and Ebola and talking about the length and the growth of the coronavirus. You got main point 2, the information spreads. Talk about all the resources that are out there. The fact that all these different agencies are reporting about it, and compared to other issues, that information is not prevalent. It's not out there as much. It's not as in the news and widely reported as much as we get inundated. And why is that important? Main point 3, the solution. Store protections on this issue are weak, and they need to protect their what they call liability. So subpoint 1, liability, explaining liability protections are weak. Maybe even if they have waivers that governments are trying to pass right now, maybe will not be held up in court as easily as others because of how prevalent the information is and how much proven the spread is. And that goes into the regulations of why stores, even when people are saying maybe we shouldn't be as much, are still going to be requiring masks and social distancing for some time because they want to avoid the possibility of being sued. And waivers will not save it. See how this works? This is how these things this video shows you how you put together a bunch of ideas and you cram it into a possible outline. Your topic for this semester, and everyone has different variations, you can't do the same speech, but your topic for this semester is, for this persuasion speech, is to coronavirus. What do we do next? You can find solutions from all these different places and so forth. You can't use anything in the sense of my structure that I use because this is all past tense. All 3 I showed you were in the past. These have already been done. You can do things like continuing social distancing for a solution, reopening, come up with creative ways on your own or some suggestions that are out there, whatever you want to do. We'll end it with both my examples. And whatever you want to do, that's going to be your speech. Now, the last thing I would say is, of course, the discussion question. And this discussion question is different from the others. In the past, the discussion question has been something about this. But this is actually a test of your knowledge from the beginning of the semester. I use my image from my military background when I was a firefighter in the Marine Corps for a reason. Remember at the beginning of the semester when I talked about public speaking or an argumentation, there's a certain thing you have to do in your speech for you to get over with the audience. In the discussion thread, you need to put your answer on why you think I use my picture of myself in my military uniform. I gave you a clue already. Replies will not be seen until you answer the question. So this is kind of a little test for 5 easy points, alright? By the way, there's no wrong answer, but I want a good explanation why you think your answer is correct. Now, if you are doing the journal option, you do it like normal. You write the journal thing and so forth, and you save it until another time. Alright, so there you go. And excuse my floor and my mess. This is the first time I've ever done it. If you have any questions and so forth, you know how to contact me. Oh, and good day and stay safe.